Brad, I have turned into a 73-year-old research librarian from Minnesota. It's finally happened. Because
oh my God.
For Christmas this year, we tend to do like little advent calendars. Like Lego has sets of like, you can, every little advent door is a little Lego thing and you can build it. It's kind of fun.
Yep. My kids had them for years.
And this year, I don't know how I saw it, but I bought an advent calendar of Bon Maman jams. And for those that speak French, I might be saying that wrong, I don't know. But it's every day's a new jam, Brad, and it's the most amazing advent calendar you could ever imagine. Every night after dinner, we make a little toast and we cut up the toast and we try different jams. It's the most random jams too. It's like, hey, what if we had strawberry, but Belgian peaches, but also we had South African fruit that you've never heard of before, and we put it into a jam. And Brad, it's amazing. It's an amazing advent calendar.
Wait a minute.
It's all jams.
Is it just all at the same time, swirled together, those three things?
All 24 days are different jams. Brad, they're delightful little cute jam holder things. They're amazing.
I don't know where to start.
I know this sounds like an ad for Bon Maman. It's not. I just love this advent calendar.
I don't know where to start with you. Number one, there's only three jams. You've got strawberry, grape, and orange marmalade.
Right.
And of those three, nobody eats that last one. It's just there for show to fill out the store shelves.
It's been on the shelf since 1972. Yeah.
Yes, that same jar of marmalade. And when actually you find out when your kids have kids, they send you a jar as a grandparent starter kit, and it just stays in the cupboard for the rest of the till you finally croak. But jam and number two, after dinner.
Okay.
You eat toast for breakfast?
Well, yeah, but we're always in a rush to get to school, so we can't do the jams in the morning, because you want to savor the jam. You want to look at the jam, read about the jam. Brad, this is why I'm saying
you want to savor the jam.
I've turned into a 73-year-old research librarian because I'm like, let's try today's jam, everyone. What's today's jam, family?
My God.
And I'm not kidding. I am legitimately excited about these jams every night when we open up these jams. Brad, I don't know who I am. Help me. Get me off the edge. I've become a man who cares about jams.
When you said I want to talk about my new advent calendar, I was on board because I've seen the advent calendars that have little bottles of scotch or little bottles of whiskey, and I'm like, hey, this is going to be a great advent calendar. I can't wait to hear about it. Jam? We're going to talk about jam now?
We're really learning about ourselves when you said, when the phrase exciting advent calendar entered Brad Geiger's head, it was like, oh, wow, a whiskey a day trial pack. But when it entered Dave Kellett's head, it was, I want a new jam every day. I want rhubarb and pumpernickel.
Yeah, well, listen, all I can tell you is when it comes to whiskey, that's my jam.
We're ending on that note. Although I will say this, I know what I'm getting you for Christmas next year, and it's a jam-a-day advent calendar. Holy shit, you're going to love it. You're going to love it, Brad. And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show exclusively about jam and jam-related items and what you can do with your jam and how great jam is to have a new jam every day.
I'll tell you what you can do with your jam. And making a living from comics, I'm Brad Geiger, the author of the Webcomics Handbook and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, who is a big aficionado of jam. Not going to stop talking about jam. Really a big jam guy over here.
My God. This whole thing is turning into a jam session.
Anyway, this week's show is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Brad, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And we're not. Now, listen. What's the difference between jam and jelly?
I have no idea.
That's something I've never understood.
Here's the thing. I have no academic knowledge of what the hell jam is. Also, there's jam. There's preserves. There's spreads. There's jellies, which are different. But honest to God, I have no idea. All I know is there's 24 days of these delightful little jars, and I'm opening them up, and each one is a taste sensation, and I'm not complaining about it at all. It's amazing.
God, my God, the toaster is on full time over at the Kellett household. Well, listen. Before my esteemed partner talks any more about stuff to put on top of toast, I want to talk about making a toast to our new ComicLab sponsor, Comicraft. Now, listen, you hear us talk about this every year. Comicraft has a huge January 1st New Year's Day sale on their fonts. And if you're looking for fonts, whether they're dialogue fonts for word balloons or sound effect fonts or just any kind of creative fonts, Comicraft is the place to go, and January 1st is the day to do it.
And honest to God, this is something we can sing from the hilltops about, because we use and love Comicraft fonts. I mean, the cliche thing, I loved it so much I bought the company. I feel like at this point that I have bought the company of Comicraft, because I have dropped hundreds and hundreds of dollars on amazing fonts that have absolutely changed my comics. I'm not even kidding. This is the Comicraft I will sing the praises of to no end, because every year at that sale, I make an attempt, and this is the honest to God advice I would give you. I build up slowly first with, I got a couple body fonts, maybe one or two sound effect fonts that first year. And then I've been slowly building out my collection of different body fonts to sort of accentuate if I need a different voice tone or a specific mood for a short run comic. And then I will do sound effect comics. And really, sound effect comics are where I have spent the bread and butter money over the years, because having the right sound effect font at the right moment, if someone's being frozen and you have a font that looks like it's being frozen, it is chef's kiss perfect. It is so nice when you have the right font. So I can absolutely sing the praises of Comicraft and their big New Year's Day sale.
Absolutely. Now, here's what you're going to want to do. I want you to write down comic book fonts, plural. comicbookfonts.com. That's where you're going to want to have that bookmarked, and you're going to want to set a little reminder on your phone for New Year's Day, especially if you plan on going out New Year's Eve. When you wake up the next morning, you might not have fonts on the brain. you might need a little bit of toast before you can get your day started, but you're going to want to set a reminder, because you don't want to miss it. Here's why. Some of their fonts, and by the way, they're worth every penny, right? I bought Comicraft back when it was $395. Never thought another thing about it. And I used it ever since. It was a great expenditure for me. A lot of their fonts are like, I'm looking right now, $139, $79. No matter what the price tag is on New Year's Day, the price is going to be based on the year. So they've always done it this way, which means this coming New Year's Day, the price of each of their fonts is going to be $20.23 for 2023. So every font, each one at a time, is $20.23 a piece. You're not going to get these fonts for better prices. $20 and change is a pittance for this stuff, and it's tailor-made for comics making, right? I think we had a question on the show not too long ago. Well, what if you're having a hard time finding a font? My answer was look harder, because these are the kind of fonts that are made for the thing that we do. You're not going to find, in my opinion, a good word balloon font outside of a place like Comicraft. And you're not going to find a better price than on January 1st at Comic Book Fonts, the New Year Day sale. You're going to want to put a reminder in your phone. I'm going to be there. Dave's going to be there. We're going to be spending way more money than we planned to, and you're going to thank yourself all year round.
Absolutely. Comicbookfonts.com. Join Brad and I. We will be spending any money we got from this sponsorship on fonts at comicbookfonts.com. It's the honest to God truth. That is the honest to God truth. Well, anyway, we've got a huge show for everybody, so let's jump right into it. We've got a whole. It's not just jam related stuff here on ComicLab. It's what you've come to expect is jam and jam related talk. But I have a question here, Brad, from Make Kong that comes in and says, "What if I succeed?" This is a unique question. We talk about the fight, the grind, the how, the commandments to make our beloved webcomic a success, and how sometimes we might step aside to do a different project or medium to learn something and gather more viewers. But what if I Rogue One my Star Wars universe? What if understanding comics becomes so big that making actual webcomics is almost impossible due to the fans' clamor for more tutorials, as might have happened with that book? What if Beekman's World is always the first search instead of the OG Beekman and the Jax comic? What if Brad's thirst trap TikTok tuning tips and tales grow so much that he has to decide between it and ComicLab? So that's the idea there, Brad, is what if you're working on a project in your comics, your webcomics that you love so much, your graphic novel, your short form, whatever it might be, but you dabble in something else to spread your wings, to learn, to give your mind a break from your day-to-day with your comics. But that second project takes off. It succeeds beyond your wildest imaginations. What do you do then, Brad? How do you handle that?
Oh, I got to be honest with you. I've often thought, my mindset has been the same on this, and that is you don't get to choose your success all the time. Right. Sometimes you're looking in one place and your success finds you in another. And I think you're dopey to forego success just because it wasn't where you were looking for it.
Right.
Right. It's like if you lost your keys and you're sure that your keys were in the living room and you finally find them out in the kitchen and you refuse to pick them up because you're expecting to find them in the living room. That would be dumb. Right.
Yeah.
I think foregoing success because it wasn't where you were looking for it would be kind of silly. So I'd say if you find success, take it. But I could also understand that it would be a little bit difficult for me because we've got two types of side projects, right? One of those types of side projects is comics related.
Yes.
Let's say you started a comics related side project and you found your success there, right? That would be one type of deal. On the other hand, like what if those TikTok videos actually did take off, right? And then I'd have to decide, do I want to be a cartoonist or do I want to be somebody that does videos more like a YouTuber or a VTuber type of personality? Do I want that? That's a whole nother conversation, Dave, don't you think?
Yeah, I do agree with you that in some respects, you can't choose what you're famous for in life. You know, you can't choose what hits.
Yeah.
In the same way that sometimes you can't choose how people feel about you, or how, no matter what you present to the world, sometimes you can't make them feel about you the way you'd like to have them feel about you, which is fine. But for example, young Brad spent his whole life wanting to be a cartoonist, striving to be a cartoonist, kind of aiming all of his, you think a joke is coming, a joke is not coming. I can see it on your face.
I'm getting ready.
No,
ready.
I know. It's so funny how we have to gird our loins when the other one starts to be gearing up. I'm actually about to compliment you, not insult you. But Brad spent his whole childhood and his young adult life, and I would argue even your professional life, taking on tasks that would make you a better cartoonist. Like even the graphic novel job at the newspaper was to, in some respects, accentuate your skill set for cartooning, right? And yet then you found that you had this beautiful voice that also worked for podcasting, right? You have this great voice for radio. And I will say this as a friend, I wish I had your voice. It's an amazing voice. And so, listen, the podcast is doing wonderful. It's doing great, but it could conceivably have take off yet in a big way. And you find that you have to do radio work or TV work because your voice is so good. Well, how wonderful that in some way the world is reflecting on Brad that a skill set that he has is valued and loved and cherished. He can still be the other thing, but he's loved for, I mean, in some respects, that's what happened to my wife. My wife considers herself a playwright, loves writing for the theater, is about to start writing for the theater again for the first time in like 15, 20 years. But TV sparkled for her, and that's both sparkled and sparked. I mean, she really took off at TV and made a whole career out of that as a TV writer and then as a showrunner. But she can still considers herself a playwright, which is parallel but very different. It's a very different world to write for. It's a very different world to walk in. And so
different business, I'm sure.
Yeah, but it's also why fight success? Like at some point you're swimming upriver. If things are going well for you with a thing and you are allowed an outlet in this world, you're already doing better than 99% of people. If you found something that you naturally sparked with anyway, it might not have been your first choice, even if it's your second choice, you're still enjoying it and crowds are reacting to it. There's nothing terribly wrong with that.
Yeah. No, and not only that, but Dave, you've got a real world example of this in a way because you started Sheldon first, and Sheldon and humor comics in general were always your bread and butter. That's what Dave Kellett was aiming for. And then you started kind of a side project. Actually, you're perfect in both ways because you started a non-related side project being the comics documentary Stripped.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that brought you away. And you've talked about it on the show, and sometimes almost threatened to bring a halt to your cartooning. For a lot of times it was difficult for you to do the cartooning and do the documentary. And not for nothing, I could, in another universe, in a universe full of infinite possibilities, there's one universe where Dave was so taken by that Stripped documentary that he said, you know what? I'm going to become a documentarian.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm going to do.
Well,
that could have been you.
My friend Phil, who made was one of the producers on the Spider-Verse movie. He's like, so what's the next one? What's the next movie you're making? I was like, I don't know that I have another one in me, Phil. And he's like, come on, make another movie. And I was like, it's not the path I want to walk. I don't want to be a filmmaker. But yes, and so for me, the Drive is the nearest parallel in my life because I always grew up wanting to be, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, a newspaper cartoonist, which was joke a day, it was gag a day, it was character based, but it was joke a day. And so that's where I wanted to be. And yet after I think it was 15 years of doing Sheldon, maybe 12 years of doing Sheldon, I got this idea for a sci-fi strip, which was long form, very different. I frankly didn't have the skill set yet to do what is ostensibly a graphic novel. Set in space with a lot of technology. It's just not my wheelhouse of what I was good drawing at, and yet the story took off and is infinitely more financially successful than Sheldon at this point. And so why fight it? I first of all, it came from me. It's from my creativity, right? It's not like it came out of nowhere. It was from me. Why not lean into it if people are really enjoying it? There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's also sort of the adventure of life in that you never know which path is going to be the exciting one to walk down.
And not only that, but everything you learned doing humor comics daily for such a long time informed Drive because you brought all of that humor training, and it makes Drive a completely different reading experience than it would have been otherwise. Reading Drive is delightful because you had 10 years plus of Sheldon leading up to it.
Yeah, in fact, one of my personal critiques with a lot of sci-fi is that it's humorless. There's no joy in sci-fi. They're taking it too seriously the Epsilon 5 with the recursive lasers, and you never get a joke in there. Whereas you're right that for me, coming out of a joke setting, it both improved the humor of the strip and of the story, but it also made the pacing of the way dialogue worked, the way the writing worked. It coming from a humor strip tradition changes the way you write a little bit. So anyway, I mean, you've had this in your own career, Brad, that sometimes the path that you thought you were going to walk down is not where you ended up going.
Absolutely. In fact, for my Patreon, I've started doing an Ask Me Anything column because it's something nice to put up on Sundays, and typically it turns into quite a long column because, as you know, I can talk about myself for an awful long time. But one of the questions was, what the transition into not safe for work comics, was that something you always wanted to do, or was that something that it was a sudden decision? What was that like? And I said, the funny thing is that this was never a place that I expected to be. Right. Again, like you, I very much saw myself as a young Berkeley Breathed in the making with that newspaper strip, that 4-panel humor. The world changed around me. I changed an awful lot. And I said, but at the same time as all of that, if you look even at those early Greystone Inn comics and the first several years of Evil Inc., there was always a lot of there was double entendres. There was a lot of wink and a nod kind of stuff. I was always kind of edging towards it, little bit. And then when I realized that I had an avenue that I could just unleash everything and not have and kind of expand the boundaries of what I did, once I did that and took that first step, it's like, oh wow, this is nothing the way I really thought it was going to be. It's a much bigger writing challenge than I thought it was going to be. And to do it well, I think I had to really improve. Drawing challenge, I've said before, much bigger drawing challenge, and also just a creativity challenge in finding new ways of bringing that same joy and happiness that I bring to my front facing strip to the Patreon comic has been delightful. So, and again, it's one of those things that I didn't think I was going to end up here, but when I saw the opportunity, you got to take it because sometimes you take where the road leads you.
Well, and I want to back up sort of a bigger, broader picture, which is in a lot of respects with your art career, I would suggest that you tend to be happier when you say yes more often than you say no. And what I mean by that is I have some actor friends that they have a specific image of the actor they want to be. And so when certain roles would come up, and acting is a very different job because you have to take, in some respects, what the world gives you, especially at the beginning. And they would say no to it. And in part, I have found, and I fight this battle myself, I'm not great at it, so I'm not like, preaching from some high place on this, is that the times where I said yes to a project that was working, or yes to a proposal, or yes to trying out something new, I think I tended to be happier than if I had shut down and said, no, nothing new. I don't want to do that. I don't care if it's working. It's not what I want to be. That kind of thing. I mean, even with I could jokingly say, I never made a second film, but the fact is I spent 4 years making a film, and I'm so glad that I tried that path. Because if nothing else, I tried it. I loved it. I enjoyed the time that I did it, but I reaffirmed for myself that I wanted to be a cartoonist. So I guess what I'm saying is, having walked the path, I then was able to make an informed decision about which one I wanted to reinforce, which is to be a cartoonist.
I'm so glad you brought up acting, because this really is maybe one of the best non-comics example of what we're talking about comes from the world of acting, and it's in the actor Leslie Nielsen. Right?
Oh, yeah.
We all know Leslie Nielsen as that guy from the Airplane movies, from the Naked Gun movies, and the TV show Naked Gun, and all of those iterations. Dracula Dead and Loving It, I still think, is an undersung Mel Brooks movie. But we know Leslie Nielsen reached the pinnacle of his fame and stardom as a comedic actor. What we forgot is he had decades full of struggling as a leading man type, right? His acting roots go all the way back to 1950.
That. Yeah, that's right. He was a leading man type, wasn't he?
In fact, was it Creepshow? It was one of those horror movies where, he gets played. He was in that. He was in a number of Columbo guest starring roles, leading man, handsome,
because
debonair.
To be fair, he had a voice that when he really put it on,
He's not a bad looking guy.
But he had that sort of dramatis, kind of persona that was like amazing in terms of like when he put on the voice that he wanted to put on. He could be that leading man voice, although, it just never clicked for him that way. You're right. Yeah. So keep going.
Yeah. And he all through the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, he's not doing badly, but he's also not setting the world on fire as a leading man type. And then he gets cast in, first he had a role, I think, in MASH. If you look back at MASH, there was an episode called The Ring Bearer, The Ring Banger, something like that. So that's in 1970s. Then he gets cast in his full real first comedic appearance in Airplane, playing against type for him. And all of a sudden we realize that this guy's got a real flair for comedy. Yeah. And the rest is history, right? And so, how dumb would it have been for him to say, no, I'm still going to hang on to that leading man thing. It's going to happen for me yet.
Right.
I came into this business to be a leading man. I'm going to be a lead. No, he said, hey, people love me when I'm tripping and falling over the top of myself and saying dumb things. I'm going to do that. And thank goodness he did, because I don't know that there's a whole lot of other actors that have made me laugh as hard or as consistently as Leslie Nielsen, but it's a short list, and he's at near the top. Thank goodness he leaned into that.
Yeah, and so I guess I think both Brad and I would say that the sort of the adventure that is life is not a guaranteed path of like, I'm setting out on this road and I will not diverge from this road. Life is going to send you on all sorts of ways, and part of the success of it, in terms of navigating it, is to kind of sometimes go with the flow and enjoy the journey while you're doing it. So if Project B is taking off more than Project A, sometimes you can lead to a very happy heart by leaning into Project B. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you go out ready to be a certain type of person, and you think that life, I'll bring it home with this. Sometimes you go in to a restaurant, and you think that you're going to really love a steak dinner, and you order a steak dinner, and you think you're getting a steak dinner, and then the waiter comes out and he brings you jam.
Oh,
well, sometimes you just got to take that toast, take the butter knife, lean into that jam.
I tell you what, you're in for a treat. You're in for a treat, my friends. All right, Brad, I'm going to jump us into our second question. This comes in from Coop over at patreon.com/ComicLab and says, Brad and Dave love the show. Some comics use different fonts for different characters. As a graphic designer, this makes me cringe. But what about different word balloon styles, like a rough stroke for a gruff voice or a square balloon for robots or computers, that kind of thing? Brad, what are your thoughts, first off, on different fonts, which we might see in something like a Kelly comic or something from the 50s and 60s, or the idea of using different word balloons?
Yeah. So for fonts, I do this very, very sparingly. I don't give, I basically have a set of maybe 3 fonts that I use. I use Wild Words for, and by the way, they're all Comicraft fonts. I use Wild Words for my word balloons. I'll use Comicraft upper and lower for every now and again where I want to change the person's voice, like maybe like they're whispering or talking a little bit more quietly, or it's an aside. I'll use rat-a-tat-tat for a screaming dialogue. And of course, then for sound effects, that's outside of the word balloon, I'll use any number of dozens of Comicraft fonts that I've got. But I don't do a whole lot more than that. Even if I have like a robot or a mechanical voice or a vampire, who's speaking with a Transylvanian voice, because for me, that is very much like seasoning. If I go back to my food analogy, right? A little bit of salt goes a long way. It's possible to oversalt your food. And what happens is you make these decisions, especially when it's character based, right? And you say, okay, this character is a vampire. Every time he comes into the panel and speaks, he's going to speak in a Gothic Transylvanian kind of font.
Right.
And then this other guy's a robot. So he's going to be in this digital font. Beep, boop, bop, boop, beep. And here's a mermaid, and she's going to have a wishy-washy, splashy font. Now, what happens when those 3 people land in the same room at the same time and they're all talking? It's a mess.
Yeah.
It's a real mess.
Well, and here's where we have the advantage of 100 years of cartooning behind us, because we can see people that have done this, and you can sort of very quickly compare how this looks. So for people that are outside of the US, there is a fantastic draftsperson named Walt Kelly, who drew Pogo, Pogo. And if you're not familiar with it, look it up. Pogo, amazing drafting, right? Like no one will argue with this. It was one of the best drawn comics ever made. The lettering, again, this is subjective. The lettering drives me bonkers because every character has a voice. There's the one sort of preacher character that has a kind of a King James Bible looking font. There's another character that kind of looks like they're like a hostage note that's been cut out from different lettering. There's another character that looks like an idiot, or that speaks like an idiot, so his font is like idiot based. What I'm getting at is it's exactly what Brad described. It's cacophonous. It's uncomfortable to read. It's a version of, as Brad always says, if they can't read your comic, then they won't read your comic. And so when you're looking at this, you're like, I don't even want to dive into this. There's 14 different fonts here. Everything is coming at me from different directions. Like Brad, I definitely season my comics. And I will say, over the 25 years of cartooning, sometimes too much, sometimes too little. It's a balance, and we all get better at using it. I think better to err on the side of too little than too much, because I think Walt Kelly is demonstrative of what happens when you lean into it too much. Maybe at first he thought it was cute, and then unfortunately all these different characters who, when they were standalone with their own little King James font, hey, it was kind of cute. But then when you put that guy next to the one that's talking with the hostage-taking letter-cutting font, oh boy, did that look cacophonous. Like it looks like a craziness. And so we see that in 100 years of comics. You can see where it doesn't go right. So like Brad, I would say it's a little bit of salt. It's a little bit of pepper. You want to sprinkle it in. And frankly, better to err on the side of too little than too much.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what else. Well, just going on the Walt Kelly, as long as we're savaging Walt Kelly, it didn't help that he also did a lot of dialect. He did a lot of phonetic dialect printing in his comics. So they'd have Southern accents, and like they'd be, hey, yous guys, for example, right?
Right.
Well, he would write YOOZ. right? For, hey, use guys. And so not only was it difficult to read because of the beautiful but obtrusive lettering, but then you'd have to suss out what the phonetic
weird
words
regionalisms,
were, right?
that he was using. Yeah, exactly.
So man, it was tough to read. Now let's take that other thing, that other subject that came up, the different styles of word balloons themselves.
Right.
Again, seasoning, little bit of this goes a long way. And I'll tell you the mistake I see in a lot of Pro-Am comics, and I will insist that it's a mistake, color coding the word balloons.
Oh, yeah.
I do not like, not number one, just because it creates a cacophony up there. And lettering is the invisible art. Lettering is supposed to be so good that you don't know it's there. And number one, color coding your word balloons. Every time Jim talks, it's going to be a pink word balloon. Every time Jane talks, it's going to be a blue word balloon. And then Fred's going to come in and he's always speaking in a purple word balloon. What happens is, and you see this happen a lot in Pro-Am comics, it's a mistake. What they do is they expect you to memorize that Jim always speaks in pink word balloons. So then they'll have a scene where they show the outside of the house and a pink word balloon, and I'm supposed to know that's Jim because I'm supposed to be sitting there with my notes as I'm reading this freaking comic going, oh yeah, Jim, pink word balloon. God, all right. And I'll put that up. I'll post that on a Post-it note.
Post-it note next to your chair. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nobody's reading comics this way. Nobody's memorizing your key chart to word balloons. So what happens is we start to get caught up in our own universe, and it's like, well, yeah, everybody knows that Jim speaks in a pink word balloon. Well, no, they don't. It's a huge mistake. I think it unless you do it very, very carefully. And speaking as a guy that openly and honestly admits I'm not good at color. The color is not my wheelhouse. It's why I have super colorist to the stars Alex Heberling helping me out week after week. I can't do color. I'm sure there are people that can balance those colors really nicely and they can come up with very good, but oh man, unless you are really, really good at it, I'd be very careful of that. And if you do, make sure that you don't expect your readers to memorize those colors.
Yeah, I will say that in my science fiction strip, I have, as we said, sprinkled in a little bit of seasoning with fonts for metal crunching against metal, or all the sound effects of a monster or a beast attacking or a space battle, this kind of thing. No problem there. I have on occasion done this thing where word balloons are very specific to certain types of aliens, right? So I've had Square for certain robotic voices. I've also had a creature that they basically have an untranslatable language. So they speak in this guttural, almost sing-songy voice. They have a device on their throat that translates for humans. So what I've done is I have the word balloon with the sing-songy nonsense behind the translation word balloon. So basically it's two floating word balloons. I figured out a way that makes it look cool. The only reason I mention this though, is that I also have a separate alien that has very specific dialogue isms, kind of like how Yoda would speak backwards or with mangled lettering or mangled word phrasing. I have an alien that does a certain specific dialogue that's very specific. Anyway, the only reason I mention this is much like with Walt Kelly, I have found that I have to avoid ever having those two species talk at length near each other because it just becomes nonsense. Like an audience is willing to put up with one little cutesy sound effect, I think, or cutesy word balloon or cutesy display technique. But if you have too many of them on the page, people are like, what the fuck is this? What's happening with all this? If you have 19 different versions of Yoda on a page, basically, no one wants that. No one wants to read that is what I'm getting at.
It gets to be way too complicated. It gets to way too. So I think our advice, I think we're on the same page on this, Dave. Our advice in terms of all of that stuff, the fonts, the word balloon styles, the color coding, our advice is going to be the same. That's a seasoning. You don't want to rely on that. That's a seasoning. And the mark of a real great artist, whether they're an artist in the kitchen or an artist at the drawing board, is to know how much or how little of that to use.
And I will put my own button on this. If you know that a character or a species or a creature or a mythological beast in your story is going to be appearing a lot, you want that seasoning to be very light. If they're going to be appearing for one or two pages or one or two installments, then you can lean into it a little bit more. People will appreciate the joke, and then you're in or out, right? You're in, you're out. It's done. Right. But if they're going to be in a story for 500 pages and you have some weird neologism or you have some weird display system or you have some weird color system or weird, like people are going to be like, all right with this, for God's sakes, why? Just, I get it that he's talking. Make it, a one little nuanced thing at the beginning of a page and then done with it. So what I'm saying is the more something is going to be in the comic, even more does that call for careful sprinkling, careful seasoning, as Brad would say, of how you're going to do this. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, it's time for a few updates, and I've got one update that I just want to share with our audience listening at home. I've talked about growing up in Bad Axe, Michigan a lot on this show, and not so long ago, there was a documentary about Bad Axe, Michigan called, guess what? Bad Axe. Well, it's just been released. You can get it on a number of different places, including Amazon Prime. And it's really, really interesting. It basically, it's a small family from Cambodia that moved to Bad Axe, started a restaurant. And when COVID lockdown happened, they started just documenting what they were going through. The one kid was a movie guy, and he's got his camera out and started documenting COVID. It goes on from there. And of course, a lot of the arguments over wearing masks and being in a small town during this time, it was really, really interesting. It really was an eye-opening look at the place I grew up, and I think it's just a really well done documentary. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the place that Brad grew up, some of the good and some of the not so good, it's an excellent documentary, and you can find it on Amazon Prime. And just a reminder for those at home, it's not Badass Michigan, it's Bad Axe Michigan. Although I want it to be badass every time you say it. How did the name Bad Axe come about, by the way? The story is that there was a settler that was up there doing a lot of hunting and trapping, and he marked this area with an old hatchet that wasn't good anymore because it was broken in half. So he put this hatchet into the tree to remember where to come back to, and he put in his notes that he wanted to go back to the place with the bad axe. Oh, I see. I did. Yeah, so $100 on the fact that guy probably sounded like this. Well, you're not allowed on my land. This is where I hunt the varmints. It was an early Gabby Hayes initiative. Exactly. I have a quick update for everybody, which is GPT-3, which is the AI that approximates writing in a very human-like way. There is now a new update called GPT 3.5. And I have to tell you, I've been seeing some examples of how good it is. And I just want to put this out there for everybody that it's getting scary good. They had a particularly good example that I saw. Speaking of King James, we talked about that a second ago. Someone had requested GPT 3.5 write how to take a peanut butter sandwich that was stuck in a VCR out of the VCR in the style of the King James Bible. And it was note perfect how you would do it with writing in the style of the King James Bible. And also it had, I don't want to scare anybody, it had an element of humor to it. And so I just want to prepare people that it is getting ridiculously good, ridiculously fast, how good AI is getting both on the writing and drawing side of things. This is not to say that I have the edge on where this is going, but just to keep an eye on it because it's getting very good.
Very, very good.
Yeah, and it's a topic that I know that we're going to be talking about more and more in the coming year, 2023.
Yes.
Now, Dave, let's get back to some of the questions that we've got, because I've got one that I'm going to be fascinated to hear your answer to. This comes in from our Patreon backer, Clay, who says that he wants some advice on drawing more minimalist. All right. He says, most of my drawing has been fairly realistic and very large. And I was looking for information on how to learn to draw cartoons at a smaller size. I've been practicing drawing in a more cartoony style, and I feel that I can produce a decent image in that style if there are no size restraints. But even in that style, I have a hard time drawing small enough to fit in panels and include word balloons.
Yeah.
When I do draw, let's say in a 4-panel, 4-inch by 13-inch size, things tend to get cluttered and unclear very quickly. I'd love to get to the point where I can draw well at roughly that size for the sake of time, money, and storage space. So when you guys were learning to draw traditional comics, did you have any exercises, resources, frames of thought, etc., that helped you to learn to draw well at that size?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, and it's both easier than you think and not easier to think, in the sense that it takes a kind of a couple minutes to learn, but a lifetime to master. So here's some opening bits of advice I would give on drawing simpler, which is comics are essentially like poetry. You're trying to capture the essence of the thing in as few as lines possible that capture the most true and not realistic, but a truth within iconicity, truth within simplicity, rather than truth within realism. So to that end, some things that I would recommend as far as things you can do to help you better capture how to capture the essence of a human, the essence of a tree, the essence of a house, is to physically draw some of the greatest characters in comics history, just to try it. See how Charles Schulz drew Snoopy. Physically draw Snoopy. You might think, oh, I get it. I know what it is. It's a roundish dog. It's got some black spots. How tough it could it be? But no, I'm saying physically draw it. And you'll see as you draw it, how he reduced the lines of dog, quote unquote, down to Snoopy, right? Draw Calvin. See how he reduced the idea of hair, quote unquote, into 5 or 6 spikes and a couple strokes of lines, right?
Yeah.
And by doing that, by trying out how Fred Flintstone was Fred Flintstone, how Ziggy is Ziggy, you'll see the sort of tricks of the trade that they use to define specificity with very few lines, with simplicity. So that's my first pass. Brad, what's your first pass on how to suggest to get from realism to more iconicity?
I love your idea, by the way. And I'm just going to piggyback on it for a bit. When Dave says draw Calvin, don't just draw Calvin, draw a page full of Calvin, doing as many different actions as you can possibly think. Running, jumping, dancing, doing whatever. Draw a page full of Snoopies doing, and from different angles. What does Snoopy look like from above? What does Snoopy look like when he's, flying his plane? Really, spend some time with that, and you can learn a lot. Here's another thing that I'm going to tell you. If you really want to see some folks that can draw very, very well, very, very simply, and put really clear images together, go down and find your closest school that teaches animation, and talk to an animator. Talk to an animator. I see this with I've got one of my classes is suggested for animation students. So I get a lot of animation students through my storytelling class. And I get to, of course, when I'm lecturing, a lot of times they're drawing because they do the same things that I did in school, which is, drawing when they're doing anything. Mm-hmm. And they make a beautiful, beautiful images in just a few strokes. And I just marvel at it all the time. And I say, how did you do that? How can you do that in just a few strokes? I would spend hours on that. And they go, well, when you're animating, you've got to do several hundred drawings in a very, very short time. So when you've got to crank these out over and over and over in a little bit of time, you become very good at the economics of line. You become very good at choosing your moment, your stroke. You make a stroke, you stick with it, you move on to the next, because you don't have time to get precious when you're an animator.
Yeah. So let me give you a real world example too. In terms of animation with character design, sometimes the decision to include a button on a shirt, or to go from 5 fingers to 3 fingers, or to go from having pants or no pants if you're on Donald Duck, or having a shirt or no shirt if you're Mickey Mouse. Yeah. That single decision, which you're like, oh yeah, no big deal. But that single decision can add thousands of animation hours just based on all the repetition that character is going to have to be drawn, cell to cell to cell to cell to cell. Yeah. And so what I'm saying in my own career is that, say my duck character doesn't have any clothes on. If I had chosen 25 years ago and 5,000 comics ago of Sheldon to put a little pair of pants with a little belt on Arthur, that would represent at this point hundreds, if not thousands, of additional drawing hours for me over 5,000 comics. And so part of what I'm getting at with that is that Brad is on the right thing, that animators have both a time constraint and a repetition constraint. And so pairing that with what you're under, which is a space constraint, all 3 of those things will help teach you. Basically, you need to keep drawing that character that you want to draw again and again and again and again and again. What will happen is frustration will kick in, and you'll be like, does he really need the suspenders? No, the suspenders can go. Do they really need the second cowlick? No, the one cowlick is enough in terms of character design. What I'm getting at is you'll see that the essence of the character can be communicated with less, because annoyance will kick in, because time is a constraint, space is a constraint, repetition is a constraint. And so frankly, in some respects, more drawing is what's called for here in terms of getting better. And I know that's not a happy answer. That's not what you want to hear. You want to hear that there's some quick steps, but in many respects, having to do it many times in a tight space with repetition will force you to become more iconic and to capture the essence of that character.
Yeah. And you're going to feel awkward at first, right? Because it's something you're not used to doing. And the only way to get past that is, like Dave says, to do it a lot. And I'm just going to throw in that time thing again. Here's another way you can do it. Set a timer up as you're working on a panel and give yourself about half the time that you think that you need, right? Because I, not only from my animation students, but also from working in newspapers for 20 years, I know that nothing kicks you into high gear and makes you concentrate like a deadline. Yeah. And if you really hold your own feet to the fire, don't let yourself slide and say, I've got to get this panel done in whatever, I'll say 20 minutes. I've got to get this panel done in 20 minutes, and then set your phone up with the ringer and the shoes and just a ridiculous ear-splitting air horn, and crank it on high so that when your time is up, you're done. And then move on to the next panel, whether you want to or not.
Yeah. And I think I love that idea so much that I want to pitch another version of that, which is try on a single piece of paper. Give yourself a timer, 10 minutes. You're going to create a character, right? Now set it to 5 minutes. You've got to draw what you've just drawn, but you'll find that you're going to shave some lines off of there because you've only got 5 minutes now. And what's the essence of that? Now you got to do it in 2 minutes. So the third character you're going to draw is that same character, but you only have 2 minutes to get it down. Then finally, that same character, but you only have 1 minute to get it down. And I swear to God, just time alone will force you to be like, I don't need to draw that. This can be one continuous line instead of 4 curvy lines. This can be reduced completely. I can take this part out. And you'll find that just the sheer, like Brad said, that's a great idea, Brad. Using a physical timer is a great way to be like, no, get to the essence of what the character is and get it over with quickly. Yeah.
And again, that deadline is going to turn you into a different artist. So Dave, I've got a question specifically for you. And actually, this question has come in. I've seen it on social media. I've seen it in our Patreon questions, and I've seen it on the Discord. So I'm just going to ask you outright. Webtoons. You've said a few times that you've had a lawyer looking into Webtoons. You haven't started posting on Webtoons, and that has a lot of people out there who listen to the show say, "Oh no, did he find something out that I need to know about?" So. The question is, Dave, what did you find out about Webtoons that has prevented you from posting?
That's a great question. So there's two answers to this. The first one is what I found out, and the second one is what actions have I taken because of what I found out. So for everyone, just a reminder, Webtoons, or who are not familiar with it, Webtoons is a standalone website. They have their own terms and conditions, their own contract that they ask you to sign when you begin posting on the website. And I have not done it because I said I wanted to have a lawyer look at it, because we've all seen the horror stories from going back as far as Siegel and Schuster, and even before that with Katzenjammer Kids, going back 100 years in comics in terms of arguments over who owns what do they own, how can they use it, what can they not use it, of things that they created. So I'm always of a careful mindset when it comes to doing businesses that have a contract that they've created and are sliding across the table for me. And so I went, my wife's lawyer is not particularly good with comics IP. She's a TV lawyer. And my lawyer that I normally use for comics is not currently practicing. Their insurance has lapsed. So they're intentionally, they let it lapse because they're not practicing at the moment. So I asked for recommendations. I went out to 3 lawyers. 2 of them have not responded, and I'm still waiting on a response for the 3rd. So the true answer is I don't have a fully paid for response from a lawyer yet on it. I've heard some things from lawyers of agents' friends that say that there's some trickiness and some concern about exclusivity when it comes to publishing rights. And so that might limit your ability to sell on a title, because you cannot have non-exclusive, or you would have to have non-exclusive rights for the publishing. Again, that's not legal. And also, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take this as gospel. I'm just saying I've heard that through the grapevine. But so here's what's happened. So I don't know the answer yet, is the truth. And so my response to that answer is, don't jump into something until you know what it is. And so until I get a lawyer that I've paid for and that has responded to me, I'm not going to jump in. And here's the true thing too, is that the services of a lawyer are, like most things in life, they're paid for on an individual and good faith basis. I don't know that I could or ever would share that legal advice that I would get from a lawyer. That would be the equivalent of using Brad's IP without paying for it, in a way of like sharing it with the world, you know?
Yes.
But for what it's worth, I have not done Webtoons yet, because I don't yet have my own paid for legal advice on whether it's a good idea or not. That's the short version.
Absolutely. So, Dave, I've got one more question from the old hopper here, from a $5 Patreon backer who asks this. Hey, Brad and Dave, I found I am finally starting to get a little faster with my pages. But in terms of webcomics, I'm still a little slow. I found I can be confidently consistent at an upload schedule of every other week for my long form comic. As much as I want to post once a week, I just can't put out a significant amount of content in that amount of time. So my question is it better to post more frequently or to be consistent, even if it's slower? My answer has been to use that time to build up social media posts, get ahead on pages, rest, etc., until I can confidently move the deadline earlier. This comic being new, though, just getting it out there might be better. What do you guys think? So, Dave, the question is, which is more important, frequency or consistency?
Ooh, that's a good question, Brad. I think between frequency and consistency, if you have to choose, I think consistency is the better one to go with. Because what's the use of being frequent if it's not very good? You know what I mean? Yes, it's here every Tuesday. You know what I mean? But I had to crap out this last page. It's not very good. But if you're consistent, and sometimes it's coming every week, sometimes it's coming every 3 weeks, sometimes it's coming every 4 weeks, I feel like I know I can point to a few careers where it's been better to be consistent than it has been for them to be frequent. What are your thoughts about this? Because I don't know that we've ever answered this before.
Let's talk about frequency, in that frequency is a holdover concept from the early days of webcomics that got seeded in our brains and it never gotten shaken, because as we've said in the past, in the early days of webcomics, it was all ad supported, and frequency was the name of the game, because the more you posted, the more you earned. It just the more pages, more people bumping into those ads, reading through your archives, it generated ad revenue. And it was important to be frequent, not only for ads, but because people were reading you through maybe like a bookmark that brought you to your site. Well, if you didn't post for like a week, maybe they forgot to open that bookmark next time and they just stopped coming to the site, and then they just forget about you after a short time. And so you needed frequency not only for the ads, but to keep those readers coming back day after day after day. You had to make it a habit. And if you broke the habit, maybe you lost the reader. Those things are still floating around in creators' brains, even though that hasn't been the world we've lived in for decades.
True.
At least 10 years at this point, right? I've talked in the past about this idea of your reader having a continuous smorgasbord of content that goes past them on a conveyor belt. And they got all this stuff going past them, food after food, maybe even some very tasty jams and marmalades thrown into the mix. They've got all of this stuff going past them.
One could only hope, yes.
They're not gonna even notice that you're gone. And that's the thing that you've got to take a moment and let that sink into your head. Even the best of us, even our most hardcore fans, a lot of times they're not going to notice that you're gone.
Yeah,
you know, they've got so much more content that they're drift. You know what's going to happen if you don't post a comic this week? You know what your number one reader's going to say? They're going to say, "Oh, look, a cat video." That's it. That's the whole bit. Yeah. That's all they're going to say. They're not going to notice. And if you're doing good work, they're going to be back. They're going to notice you're back, but they're not going to be noticed that you're gone because they've got too much other stuff to do.
Well, if I can steal a page from Brad Geiger here, I think actually there might be an argument that even more than frequency, even more the consistency, maybe what we should be arguing for, the primary thing is significance in the update, which is Brad's third part of his triad, don't you think?
Yeah.
That
I always talk
frequency,
about
consistency, and significance is Brad's sort of triad of things you got to shoot for.
I always talk about frequency, consistency, and significance. But here's the thing you got to understand about those three. They're not, you can't choose one of those to be most important. There's not the concept there is not to choose an important one and run with it. The concept is to find a balance among all three that fits for you. And your balance is going to be different than that other person's balance, which is going to be different than that other person's balance.
Can I say something? It's a little bit like a meal. A meal has to be filling, it has to be nutritional, and it also has to be tasty. Because if any one of those things is missing, the meal falls apart. If it's filling, they're just going to keep, if it's not filling, they just keep eating and eating and eating. If it's not nutritional, it's not giving you what you need. If it's not tasty, you're not seeking it out. So in a way, it's like saying you're frequent, consistent, and significant. A meal has to be tasty, nutritional, and filling, or else it doesn't work. Yeah. And if any one of those aren't there, so listen, I think Brad and I are with you that life doesn't always afford us the perfect scheduling. Especially when I had little kids, there's windows of years there where you're doing everything you can just to stay afloat in terms of like, hey, I got everybody bathed today and they all had food and I'm going to sleep now. There's a couple of years of that. And so life does not always afford you the perfect conditions to be frequent, consistent, significant. But I think you're choosing the right path, I think, in terms of how you're coming down on this.
Yeah. And the answer is, all three of those are important, and you've got to find the right balance. And as long as we're talking about balance, and as long as it's December, this is the perfect time to take just a little bit of a time out and remind everybody that it's okay to take a break for the holidays. Oh my gosh, is it ever important to take a break, spend a little time with your family, spend a little bit of time enjoying some eggnog and some decorative jams, and to just appreciate the meaning of being together with your family this time of year. Well, I see so many people, I'm going to work my ass off. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. My friend, you're missing the point. Take a little bit of time. Take a little bit of time and enjoy yourself. Those readers are going to be there when you get back. It's going to be okay. Take it from two folks that have been doing this for a long time. Your readers are going to be there. Take a break, do something else, recharge your battery, build a freaking snowman, do something. But by the way, it's okay for you to take a break because your readers are going to be taking a break. They're going to be, they don't have to listen to a podcast where somebody tells them that it's okay. They're already taking a break. They're not even going to notice. They'll be back, settle down, have a Christmas.
Listen, I'm a huge evangelist of this idea of giving myself a break between Christmas and New Year's. But I will say, Brad and I get it. If you normally
Yes.
work a 40 to 60 hour week and you're like, Brad and Dave, this is my 1 week of the year where I actually get to draw as much as I want to draw. I get that.
Yeah.
We're not saying you're a terrible person if that's the path you choose. What I am saying is that, boy, if there is a week of the year that both you and your readership and the world kind of shut down a little bit, that kind of nothing happens during that week. And so I find, as an artist, the years where I didn't let myself recharge, I kind of felt it the rest of the year. And so maybe for you, you're like, hey, listen, it's not this time of year, but I am going to be taking a vacation later in the year. And I've got a whole week and we're going to go in the mountains, or we're going to go to the desert, or we're going to go to the tropical island, or wherever you're going to go. That's good. You just got, but what Brad and I are saying is give yourself permission to recharge your batteries. You can't go if your tank is empty, you know? So you got to give yourself a break somewhere along the lines. And maybe this is the week for you, is what we're saying.
Yeah. And you got to admit when your tank is empty. Every now and again, you got to admit when your tank is empty. Dave, my tank is empty. We've come to the end of another show. I can't do this anymore. It's time for me to say you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Brad, I'll tell you what'll fill up that tank. 24 bespoke, handmade, uniquely combined fruit flavors in a jam delight that Bon Maman puts together in an advent calendar. Brad, run, don't walk to get this next Christmas. It is a fantastic delight of fruit flavors that will carry you to new vistas of taste sensation. Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my jam-filled friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
Brad, you want, when someone accuses you of being a joy-filled person, to say, yes, it's true, because I've got 24 jams that show it's the case. Anyway, the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by our pal Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
I've never been accused of being filled of joy or jam, but I have been accused of being filled with. If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Go over to Spotify right now and leave us a 5-star review. We're right at the top. We're doing great in our category, and it's thanks to folks like you. And you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/24 days of delicious jam that can be opened one at a time to savor the sweetness, the succulence of delicious jams made just for you by Bon
If
Maman.
these folks don't come back and sponsor us for 2023, I don't know what it's going to take.
Speaking of which, don't forget, comicbookfonts.com, New Year's Day.
Yes.
Don't miss it. Brad and I will be there with you. This is the time to jump in on those fonts. comicbookfonts.com. What's today's date? Today's the 6th, so we're on number 6.
Today's the 6th. You are so excited. Literally, the phrase is like a kid on Christmas. You are like a kid on Christmas.
Brad, I'm like a kid on Christmas because I'm getting Christmas jams every day for 24 days.
Oh, my God.
All right, here we go.
Oh, my God. Wait
Brad.
a minute. Wasn't that the big joke in National Lampoon? It was the Jelly of the Month Club?
I don't know. I'm making fun of myself
that sent
because
him into murderous rage?
I have never been more grandmotherly in terms of being excited about frickin' jams that are opening one a day. Okay, so everybody listening at home, Brad has suggested that I go get the actual dang advent calendar and we're going to open up a jam. Look at the size of this thing, first of all. Look at all those thick, delicious jams that are waiting to be opened up. All
Delusions.
Right, so
Delusions was the right word. Yeah.
So my one critique about this advent calendar is because the jams are so dang heavy, it's really hard to open this advent calendar. Okay, so I've opened up today's jam and I'm trying to get it out of the. Okay, here we go.
Is it stuck in there? Is it? Should I say jammed?
Oh, what is this? It's red currant and strawberry as a spread Oh, Brad, what is a red currant? I don't even know what that is. I'm delighted. I am delighted to find out what this flavor is. Brad, what journey
a
of
currant
taste?
is like a seed. That's a seed, isn't it? A
I
currant?
don't know. What culinary delight am I about to set sail on?
That's a member of the gooseberry family,
Sure.
Dave. A red currant, widely cultivated. And it's a deciduous shrub, and it's a berry that comes off of this freaking shrub.
Brad, I'm about to set sail on a journey like Odysseus himself on a setting sail on flavor and succulence that only strawberry and red currant could bring in a combined spread. Brad, next year, I know what I'm getting you. The Bon Maman 24-day jam advent calendar. You are going to join me. And every day I will call you and I'll say, did you try today's strawberry red currant spread? And you'll say, get the hell off my line. Why are you calling me?
Will your family be upset if you open it up and took a little taste right here on the screen?
No,
would they be upset?
Hold on. Let's open up that jar for everybody so you can hear it. Let's see.
What's it smell like?
I'm gonna have to. Oh, Brad, it smells like delight. Okay, hold on. I got a little bit on my. Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
All right,
like
you know what though? Actually,
jelly,
this one
doesn't
just tastes like strawberry jam. Oh well, shit.
What
was it?
Maybe this.
Oh hell! It didn't taste